My husband secretly invited my father over while I was out, and I came home to find our 8-year-old son duct taped to a chair while they forcibly shaved off his cherished Viking hair. When I tore the tape off, I found burn marks on his back, apparently inflicted to silence his screams. My son Ethan had always worn his hair long. He adored Viking lore and heavy metal, and he wanted to look like his idols. No one ever had a problem with it until my toxic relatives slithered back into our lives. They've always been the boys don't cry type, the kind who smack a toddler for tearing up. That's actually why I cut them off in the first place. When they re-entered my life, I immediately laid down boundaries. Ethan was my child, and I was raising him in a way I believed was healthy and kind. The men in my family grumbled about feminism destroying women under their breath, but eventually nodded along. Still, the cracks started early. Every visit brought some snide remark about my son. He's too jumpy. He always wants attention. He's too emotional. I remember once going upstairs to use the bathroom, only to come down and find my grandfather berating my nephew for pretending to be his favorite superhero. Real men, apparently, don't pretend, but their biggest gripe, by far, was Ethan's hair. You'd think it physically offended them. They'd tell me outright it was a disgrace, that he looked ridiculous, that back in their day a boy like him would be strapped to a chair and shaved bald. I knew I had to stop it. The moment Ethan came to me and asked if he looked like a girl and if I'd love him more if he cut his hair, I made the call. I told my family they were out of our lives again. I thought that was the end of it. But there was one thing I didn't account for. My husband, Adam. He had always seemed lukewarm about Ethan's long hair. And whenever my family made comments, I'd catch him sitting there with that quiet look of agreement, not defending Ethan, not objecting, just silently complicit. The night I cut ties with my family again, Adam and I were in bed when he brought it up. Does Ethan really need long hair? I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Do you really need your Friday beer? He stammered. Exactly, I said, cutting him off. You don't need it, but it makes you happy, and it hurts no one. Same goes for our son. He didn't reply, just nodded and rolled over. Once again, I thought the problem was behind us, especially since nothing came up about it for weeks, until the day everything shattered. I had been running errands and came home to a car in our driveway that I didn't quite recognize. For a split second, I wondered if Adam was having an affair, but that didn't make sense. I'd only been gone an hour and Ethan was home. Cautiously, I stepped inside. And what I saw in the living room made my blood run cold. My grandfather, Walter, sat there with a smug look, like he'd just handled something. I demanded to know what he was doing there. Adam invited me, he said. My jaw dropped. And then I heard Ethan scream from upstairs, not from pain, but desperation. A cry for help. I bolted up the stairs. Clumps of hair were scattered along the hallway. The screaming was coming from the bathroom. I flung open the door and was met with a nightmare. Ethan, duct-taped to a chair, Adam holding him down by the neck with one hand while shaving him bald with the other. I entered just as the final strip of hair was taken. The second Ethan saw me, he wailed, "Mommy, help!" and I snapped. I launched at Adam, physically shoving him away from our son. He stumbled back and fell. I rushed to rip the tape off Ethan. It wasn't just taped around his clothes, it was on his skin. As I peeled it off, it left angry red marks. They'd used industrial-strength tape, not even the regular kind. The entire time I was freeing Ethan, Adam stood behind me, rambling on about how this was exactly the problem, that I had coddled our son into weakness. I didn't even acknowledge him. I couldn't. All I could see was my little boy, violated, hurt, and sobbing, and the two men who did it. I scooped Ethan into my arms and carried him downstairs with me. We went straight out to my car, and I told him to wait there for Mommy. Then I marched back into the house and unleashed hell. At first, Walter tried to calm me down, claiming that Ethan had actually asked to have his head shaved. I didn't let him finish. I shouted over him honestly. I don't even remember exactly what I said, but I'm pretty sure it included something about how this was exactly why Grandma had left him. Then I turned on Adam and told him, "Congratulations. You've just won today's grand prize for being the world's biggest idiot." His prize? A divorce. And he could collect his winnings, the divorce papers, as soon as I had them drawn up. Adam just stared at me, mouth hanging open like a stunned goldfish. He even reached for my arm to try to stop me from leaving, but I was done listening. I told him I'd be staying with my sister, my one sane family member who'd always seen how twisted the rest of them were. Then I walked out. As I backed out of the driveway, Ethan asked me what he had done to deserve this. When I told him, nothing, he began to cry. Because they hadn't just shaved his head. He had told them no, of course he had. But they hadn't listened. They'd burned his back until he gave in. I pulled into the closest gas station to check for myself. When I lifted his shirt, what I saw made my blood boil, literally and metaphorically. Angry red marks covered his skin. I could barely breathe. My hands were trembling as I drove away, checking the rearview mirror constantly, afraid Adam might come after us. Ethan sat silently in the back seat, running his small fingers over his now bald head, tears streaming down his cheeks. The gas station lot felt too exposed, too vulnerable. So I pulled back onto the road and headed straight for my sister's house. The drive took 40 minutes but felt like a lifetime. Every red light made my pulse race. What if Adam followed us? Ethan barely made a sound, except for the occasional sniffle. I fought the overwhelming urge to pull over and hold him. I had to get us somewhere safe first. My sister Leah lived in a modest 2-story house on the far side of town. I hadn't called ahead, I didn't need to. She worked from home as a graphic designer and rarely left during the day. As I pulled into her driveway, my phone lit up with Adam's name. I declined the call and silenced my phone. Leah opened the door before we even reached it. Her eyes went wide the moment she saw Ethan. She didn't ask any questions, just wrapped him in a soft hug and brought us inside. I stood there, shaking, the adrenaline finally crashing down. Ethan quietly headed upstairs to the guest room while Leah put on a pot of tea. I sat at her kitchen table, staring at my hands still red from how tightly I'd gripped the steering wheel. Leah placed a mug in front of me and sat across the table, waiting. I told her everything. The cruel remarks, the constant boundary pushing, finding Walter in our living room, and walking in on Adam shaving Ethan's head while holding him down. Her face darkened with every detail. But when I mentioned the burns on Ethan's back, she stood abruptly and fetched her first aid kit. We called Ethan back down. Leah gently examined the red marks on his skin. They weren't deep burns, more like welts, probably from something hot being pressed against him, but they were unmistakable. They were proof of what had been done to him. Leah took out her phone and began taking photos, every red mark from the duct tape on his wrists and ankles, the welts on his back, his tear-streaked face, and the raw scalp beneath his newly shorn head. She was calm and precise, building a record we might need later. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 23 missed calls from Adam, 15 from Walter, even a few from other relatives who must have heard about what had happened. I ignored every single one. That first night was brutal. Ethan woke up multiple times crying out from nightmares, screaming about being tied down. I slept on the floor beside his bed, clutching his hand whenever he stirred. Leah brought us clothes from a 24-hour store since we had left with nothing but what we wore. By the next morning, I knew I had to face what came next. I couldn't hide at Leah's forever. I needed to act. I needed to protect my son. Leah was already one step ahead. She'd researched family law attorneys in the area and made a list of the highest-rated ones. Leah offered to watch Ethan while I went to legal consultations. The first attorney I met with was a woman named Victoria Chen. Her office was modest but tidy, decorated with framed children's drawings from grateful clients. She listened intently as I explained everything that had happened, occasionally stopping me to ask for clarification. When I showed her the photos Leah had taken, her expression darkened. She laid out my options. Filing for divorce would be straightforward enough, but custody could get complicated. Adam had no history of violence, and although this incident was severe, it might not be enough to bar him completely from seeing Ethan. Victoria strongly recommended filing for a temporary restraining order right away and advised me to document every single attempt at contact from that point on. I left her office feeling a mix of empowered and terrified. The idea of divorcing my husband was daunting enough, but the thought of having to share custody with someone who had hurt our child was crushing. Still, I knew I had to act for Ethan's sake. Back at Leah's, I found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, wearing one of the baseball caps she'd bought him. He looked so small, so fragile. When he saw me walk in, he asked quietly if we were going home. There was something unsettling about the way Adam had chosen that exact time to invite Walter over. What clicked in his mind to make him think that was the moment? The trail of hair leading to the bathroom might have seemed theatrical to some, but having seen it myself, I could still feel the chill in my spine. What had Adam actually been thinking during all of it? I knelt beside Ethan and gently told him we'd be staying with Aunt Leah for a while. He nodded, understanding more than any 8-year-old ever should. Adam's calls had shifted into texts. At first they were apologetic. He claimed he'd made a mistake and just wanted what was best for Ethan, but then they turned accusatory. He said I was overreacting, that I was poisoning our son against him. Finally, they became threatening. He insisted I couldn't keep his son away from him, and that he'd get custody because I was clearly unstable. I screenshot every single message. Victoria had made it clear documentation was crucial and I wasn't going to slip up, but something else in his texts worried me. He kept referencing conversations with Walter, claiming he'd been getting legal advice from him about his rights as a father. Clearly, the toxic family influence wasn't going anywhere. On the third day, while I was helping Ethan with the online classwork Leah had arranged with his teacher, there was a knock at the door. Leah checked the peephole and instantly backed away, signaling for us to stay quiet. It was Adam. He knocked again, harder this time, then began calling out, saying he knew we were inside and just wanted to talk. Ethan grabbed my hand, his fingers trembling. I pulled him into my arms and we stayed still, silent, while Adam continued knocking and calling out for nearly 20 minutes. Eventually he left. But before he did, he slipped a note under the door. It was a letter addressed to Ethan telling him how much Daddy missed him and that Mommy was being mean by keeping them apart. The manipulation was blatant and sickening. I added it to the growing stack of evidence. That afternoon, Victoria called with news. The judge had granted the temporary restraining order. Adam would be served within 24 hours and legally required to stay at least 100 yards away from us. It was a small victory, but to me, it felt like the world. That night, Leah cooked Ethan's favorite dinner, trying to offer some comfort and normalcy. He barely touched it, still shaken and adjusting to everything. When I tucked him into bed, he asked a question that shattered me. He wanted to know if his hair would grow back the same, if he could still be like his Viking heroes. I cupped his cheek and told him yes. That hair grows back. That no one could take away who he was inside. He nodded, visibly comforted, and finally fell asleep without nightmares for the first time since we arrived. Later, I sat on Leah's couch, finally letting it all sink in. My entire world had been flipped upside down in just a few days. My marriage was over. My son was traumatized. I had no home of my own, and I was relying entirely on my sister's kindness. But I'd done what I had to do to protect my child. Leah sat quietly beside me, her presence steady and grounding. She hadn't once questioned my choices or made me feel like a burden. She'd been incredible already researching child therapists who specialized in trauma, knowing that Ethan would need real help to work through everything. My phone buzzed with an email from Victoria. She'd just received confirmation Adam had been officially served with the restraining order. He'd already retained a lawyer, too, someone connected to Walter, unsurprisingly. The battle had officially begun. I thought about everything ahead of us, divorce proceedings, a custody fight, helping Ethan heal from the trauma he'd endured. It was overwhelming, a mountain I hadn't asked to climb, but I knew I had to. My son needed me to fight for him, to shield him from the toxic masculinity that had crept into our home like a poison. The next several days blurred together. I met regularly with Victoria to finalize and file the divorce paperwork. I scheduled therapy appointments for Ethan. I fended off calls from family members who were trying to convince me I was being dramatic. Each day brought new hurdles, new tactics from Adam to reassert control. He began showing up at places he thought we might be. The grocery store down the street from Leah's house, the little park where Ethan used to play. Always just far enough to avoid violating the restraining order, but close enough to be noticed. It was a clear message. I'm watching you. It was meant to rattle me. And it worked. Walter wasn't bound by the court order, and he made sure to exploit that. He started calling Leah's landline, leaving long, venomous messages, rants about how I was destroying our family, accusations that I was raising Ethan to be weak. Eventually, Leah unplugged the phone, but the words had already done their damage. They lingered in the corners of my mind during every quiet moment. Thankfully, Ethan had started therapy with a compassionate and skilled woman named Dr. Cole. She specialized in play-based trauma recovery for kids. After the first session, Ethan seemed just a little lighter, still guarded, still quiet, and still refusing to go anywhere without his cap, but there was a flicker of something coming back. The divorce papers were filed. Adam wasted no time responding and contesting everything. He accused me of being unfit, of kidnapping Ethan, of alienating him. His attorney, clearly coached by Walter, was ruthless. They demanded full custody and claimed I was mentally unstable, brainwashing our son with dangerous feminist beliefs. Victoria warned me this was going to get ugly. Adam, emboldened by Walter, was treating this like a crusade for control, a last stand for his ego. They'd throw everything they had at me: lies, manipulations, character attacks. But she was confident in our case. The evidence was stacked in our favor: the photos, the text messages, the restraining order itself, and the intimidation tactics. It all formed a narrative that clearly showed who was putting Ethan in danger. As our second week at Leah's house began, I started searching for apartments. We couldn't impose on her forever, and more importantly, I needed to create stability for Ethan. He deserved his own room again, a place that was his, a place to heal. But apartment hunting was harder than I expected. Every landlord wanted references, and explaining why I couldn't list my husband only raised more questions. Ethan came with me to viewings, always wearing his baseball cap low over his eyes. He'd become even quieter since therapy began, internalizing everything, processing it in his own way. Then Victoria called with disturbing news. Adam had filed an emergency motion for temporary custody. He was claiming I had abducted Ethan and was unlawfully withholding contact. A hearing was scheduled for the following week. Victoria assured me we had a solid defense, but warned me to prepare. This was going to be a direct attack on my character. That afternoon, while Leah stayed home with Ethan, I returned to the house Adam and I had shared, accompanied by a police escort. The restraining order allowed me to collect personal belongings under supervision. The officer waited outside while I walked through what used to be our home. I gathered clothes, some of Ethan's toys, and his cherished Viking storybooks. But I couldn't help pausing in the living room, staring at the family photos still lining the mantel. How had we fallen so far? It was clear Adam had been living there recently. The sink was filled with dirty dishes, and beer bottles cluttered the coffee table. In Ethan's bedroom, my heart sank. The Viking posters were gone, the heavy metal band flags gone. His room had been stripped bare. The walls, once filled with images of dragons and Norse warriors, had been painted a dull, sterile white. Even the curtains had been replaced with plain, lifeless blue. It was like Adam had tried to erase who Ethan was. I packed in a hurry, my hands trembling as I folded Ethan's favorite shirts into a bag. In the back of his closet, I found a small tin holding the hair ties he'd collected over the years, each one meaningful in its own way. The silver one from his first concert, the braided leather one I'd bought him for his birthday. I tucked them gently into my pocket, careful not to leave a single one behind. Back at Leah's house, Ethan's face lit up when he saw his things. He immediately reached for his favorite Viking book, running his fingers reverently over the pages filled with warriors sporting long, flowing hair. For the first time in days, he gave me a genuine smile. The following days were consumed with preparing for the custody hearing. Victoria worked closely with me, coaching me on what to expect, how to stay composed, how to answer tough questions. She warned that they'd likely frame me as an overbearing mother who panicked over something as harmless as a haircut. I practiced recounting the incident, calmly explaining the duct tape, the burns, the physical restraint without breaking down. Leah took time off work to help with Ethan. She'd grown incredibly protective of him, coming up with art projects to help him process everything. One of his drawings showed a small figure with short hair, crying, while larger figures loomed threateningly nearby. Another showed that same small figure walking hand in hand with two women beneath a rainbow. I didn't need to ask who they were meant to be. 3 days before the hearing, things escalated. Ethan's school called to report that someone claiming to be his grandfather had tried to pick him up. Fortunately, the secretary followed school policy and denied the request when he couldn't produce the required ID or authorization. Security footage captured Walter arguing at the front desk before storming out. I contacted Victoria immediately. She filed an addendum to the restraining order request that same day. The school implemented stricter pickup protocols, photo ID, and a code word, no exceptions. Ethan began asking why Grandpa had tried to take him. I struggled to find the words, to explain without completely dismantling the people he once saw as family. That evening, the doorbell rang repeatedly. Through the peephole, I saw Adam's mother standing on the porch, arms full of gift bags. She had never been outright cruel to me, but she'd always deferred to the men in the family without question. I stood frozen, listening as she called out, saying she only wanted to give her grandson some presents. Leah handled it. She stepped outside, shutting the door behind her. I watched from the window as my mother-in-law gestured wildly and dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Leah stood still, arms crossed, shaking her head. Eventually, the woman left the bags on the porch and walked away. Inside the bags were expensive toys, remote control cars, action figures, a football, all things aimed at pushing traditional masculinity. At the bottom of one bag was a folded note in Adam's handwriting. "Daddy loves you and will see you soon, and will." I photographed everything before placing the bags in the garage, untouched. Ethan's therapy sessions deepened in intensity as the hearing approached. Dr. Cole worked with him on naming his emotions around the haircut, the restraint, the fear. She taught him grounding techniques like breathing exercises to manage anxiety when the memories hit too hard. I waited outside during every session, sitting in the same chair, reading the same few magazine pages on loop. My heart ached each time I heard laughter or crying from behind the closed door. Then, 2 nights before the hearing, my phone rang at 3 a.m. The number was unknown. Against my better judgment, I answered. At first, only heavy breathing. Then Walter's voice low, cold, threatening. He accused me of tearing the family apart, of dooming Ethan's future. I didn't respond. I just hung up and immediately called Victoria. She instructed me to file a police report, which I did as soon as the station opened. But the next morning brought something even worse. Leah found an envelope tucked beneath her windshield wiper. Inside were photographs, pictures of Ethan and me around town, at the grocery store, outside Victoria's office, even standing outside the building where Ethan saw Dr. Cole. Someone had been following us, documenting our movements without our knowledge. The chill in my veins turned to ice. Victoria took the photos seriously. She warned us to start varying our routes, staying alert, and never going anywhere alone if we could help it. She'd seen this tactic before. It was psychological warfare, designed to wear me down, to make me slip up so they could use it against me in court. But I refused to let them win. The morning of the custody hearing came faster than I could process. I dressed carefully conservative, composed just like Victoria advised. Ethan clung to me tightly as Leah prepared to watch him for the day. His small voice cracked as he made me promise I'd come back. I knelt beside him and held his hands. "I will always come back," I told him. "Everything I'm doing is to keep you safe." The courthouse loomed as I passed through security. Inside, Victoria was already waiting in the lobby, calm and focused, reviewing final notes. She'd prepared thoroughly, organizing our case into a strong, cohesive argument. Photos of Ethan's injuries, evidence of harassment, the report from the school, everything carefully documented. Then Adam arrived. As expected, Walter came with him. They wore matching suits, calculated to project dignity and concern. Adam kept his eyes down. Walter, on the other hand, locked eyes with me and glared as if this were a war I'd started. I held on to Victoria's words. Stay calm, stay composed. The hearing was brutal. Adam's lawyer portrayed him as a devoted father who only wanted his son to look respectable for school photos. They said I'd overreacted, kidnapped Ethan, and denied a loving father his rightful access. They brought in family members to testify about my so-called emotional instability. Then it was our turn. I recounted everything calmly and clearly: the duct tape, the burns used to coerce, the deliberate decision to invite Walter over while I was away. I stayed steady as Victoria walked the judge through our evidence. The injury photos made the judge's jaw tighten. The harassment logs and school reports showed a disturbing pattern. Adam eventually took the stand. He insisted Ethan had been acting out and that the restraints were necessary. He said the marks on Ethan's back were from a heating pad meant to calm him. His answers felt rehearsed, but under Victoria's cross-examination, the cracks began to show. He couldn't explain why he'd used duct tape, or why he hadn't told me. The judge took 30 minutes to deliberate. It felt like hours. When she returned, her expression was hard. She extended the restraining order, not just against Adam, but also Walter. It now included Ethan's protection as well. She awarded me temporary sole custody, with supervised visitation granted to Adam pending further evaluation. Adam's face twisted with fury as the decision was read aloud. Walter muttered something bitter about liberal judges and the fall of America. Their lawyer herded them out of the courtroom, but not before Adam shot me a glare that said everything. This isn't over. Victoria walked me to my car. They'll probably appeal, she warned, but for now, your son is safe. That's what matters. The supervised visitation would begin in 2 weeks, enough time, Victoria said, for Ethan to prepare with Dr. Cole. I felt a strange mix of victory and dread. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. That evening, Leah had planned a small celebration dinner, but I could barely eat. The stress still clung to me like fog. Ethan curled up beside me on the couch, resting his head on my arm. "Did the judge say I can grow my hair back?" he asked softly. I smiled and nodded. Yes, she did. He grinned, his first real smile all day. It was a small victory, but to him, it meant everything. That night, I lay awake planning our next steps. We needed our own space, somewhere stable, somewhere Ethan could begin to truly heal. The visitations worried me. I wasn't sure how they'd affect him, but at least we'd cleared the first major hurdle. The following days passed with a deceptive calm. Ethan returned to school. Extra security measures were now in place. His teacher said he was quiet but engaged. When other kids asked about his hair, he simply said, "I'm growing it back to look like Thor." The resilience of children is astonishing. After a week of searching, I finally found an apartment that fit our budget, a cozy 2-bedroom in a secure building just a few blocks from Leah's. The landlord, a divorced mom herself, understood our situation and fast-tracked the application. We were approved within days. Ethan picked out his room instantly. He already had plans for his Viking posters. Moving day came with unexpected tension. As Leah and I loaded boxes into a rental truck, I spotted Adam across the street. He stood just beyond the restraining order's range, holding a handmade sign, "I love you, son." He stood there for hours. Neighbors glanced uneasily as I had to explain to Ethan that Daddy couldn't help us move. But the moment we unlocked the door to our new place, I felt a shift. A fresh start. A place that belonged only to us. Ethan helped set up his room, carefully placing his books and the few toys we'd brought. He hung a small calendar on the wall, marking each day as his hair grew back. Leah stayed late that evening, helping us stock the kitchen and unpack essentials. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were moving forward. The first supervised visitation loomed, bringing with it a wave of anxiety. Ethan had spent several sessions with Dr. Cole preparing, but that morning he still clung to me, his small hands gripping mine, as if to anchor himself. The visitation center was neutral and clinical sterile walls, plastic chairs, cameras in every corner. A social worker would remain in the room the entire time. I waited in a separate space, nerves rattling with every tick of the clock. It was the longest hour of my life. Through the observation window, I could see Adam attempting to interact with Ethan. He brought over toys, tried to initiate play, but Ethan kept close to the social worker. When Adam reached out to touch his growing hair, Ethan flinched away. Afterward, Ethan was quiet. Later, he told Dr. Cole that Daddy had apologized, but also said Mommy was being mean by keeping them apart. It was subtle manipulation, but it was there. Dr. Cole took careful notes, continuing to build a detailed record of these encounters. The second visitation was worse. Adam showed up with one of Walter's gifts, a remote control car, and claimed it was from Grandpa. When reminded that outside items weren't permitted during visits, he grew visibly agitated. Ethan witnessed the entire outburst and retreated into a corner. The social worker had to intervene and end the session early. Victoria used the incident to petition the court for modified visitation. The judge agreed, ordering reduced frequency and extended supervision. Adam's lawyer cried parental alienation, but the mounting evidence said otherwise. The judge reaffirmed that Ethan's well-being came first. Meanwhile, the harassment shifted into quieter, more insidious forms. Packages began arriving at our new apartment, no return address, just anonymous deliveries. Inside, hair clippers, ultra-masculine toys, notes preaching about proper boy behavior. One morning, we found all 4 of our car tires mysteriously flattened. At night, the phone would ring only to deliver silence or heavy breathing. Leah installed security cameras outside our apartment. We varied our routines, took different routes to school and therapy. I hated the fear. I hated what it was doing to us. But I refused to back down. We documented everything, every package, every call, every license plate. It was all evidence for the custody hearing. Ethan's hair slowly began to grow back. He measured it obsessively, celebrating each millimeter. Therapy was helping, too. He was learning how to process the trauma, how to release guilt that was never his to carry. His drawings started to shift from dark, shadowy scenes to hopeful images with brighter colors and smiling characters. One afternoon, I arrived at the school to pick him up and spotted a car I recognized. Walter, parked near the edge of the lot, just watching. Technically, he wasn't violating the restraining order, but the intent was clear. I snapped a photo of the car and license plate and sent it to Victoria. The school responded by ramping up security again, assigning a staff member to monitor Ethan during outdoor play. It felt like we were living in a bubble of paranoia, a safety cage of our own making. But it was worth it. My son noticed the increased security, but handled it with surprising strength. Victoria called to update me on the divorce proceedings. Adam had dug in fighting every inch of the asset division, contesting custody terms. He'd hired a new attorney, one with a reputation for aggressive tactics and personal attacks. Victoria warned me, character assassination was coming. It didn't take long. Suddenly, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years were calling. They claimed they'd heard disturbing things about my mental health, about how I was raising Ethan. Someone was spreading rumors, attempting to discredit me and shape a new narrative. I documented every call, every word. I didn't engage, I knew better. Every attempt to rattle me was just another piece of ammunition for our file. Then, the next supervised visit was canceled. Adam failed to show. He later claimed car trouble, but the social worker noted it in her report. These patterns matter, Victoria reminded me, and his inconsistency would not be overlooked. Still, the financial weight was becoming harder to bear. Legal fees, therapy bills, and daily expenses on a single income had started to stretch us thin. Leah helped where she could, but I hated leaning on her generosity. I took on freelance work typing and editing documents late into the night once Ethan was asleep. I existed in a constant state of fatigue. One evening, while making dinner, Ethan turned to me and asked, "When will things go back to normal?" I froze, unable to respond right away. Our old normal no longer existed. Instead, I knelt down and told him the truth. We're building a new normal now. One where you're safe and where you get to be exactly who you are. He seemed to understand. He gave me a tight hug and went back to his homework. The next supervised visitation came with a new hurdle. Adam arrived holding a report from a child psychologist, claiming Ethan exhibited signs of gender confusion, supposedly a result of my influence. The report came from a doctor known for espousing conservative, outdated views on child development. Victoria immediately questioned its credibility, challenging its scientific and ethical merit. Still, the damage was done. The court ordered a psychological evaluation of both me and Ethan to ensure impartiality. A court-appointed psychologist interviewed us separately and together. Ethan handled it with surprising maturity. He spoke openly about his interests, his feelings, his favorite stories and characters. The psychologist noted trauma symptoms, but found no signs of confusion, no support for Adam's claims. As the weeks passed, Adam's tactics became increasingly desperate. He filed reports with Child Protective Services alleging neglect and emotional instability. Each investigation found no grounds for concern, but the visits themselves were deeply unsettling. Ethan began to dread the sound of the doorbell. The knock alone was enough to make him freeze. Dr. Cole testified that the repeated investigations were doing more harm than good. She recommended placing restrictions on Adam's ability to file complaints without supporting evidence. The judge agreed. From that point forward, Adam was required to provide verifiable grounds before initiating any new claims. It was a small but significant win. Ethan's hair reached his shoulders again. He started forming real friendships at school classmates who thought his Viking obsession was awesome. He laughed more, slept better, and the nightmares became less frequent. The healing was gradual, but real. Leah remained our constant. She attended school functions when I couldn't, gave me breaks when I was on the verge of burnout, and never once made me feel like a burden. Her bond with Ethan deepened through all of it. He began calling her his favorite aunt, a title she wore with pride. Then came the collapse of mediation. The divorce negotiations fell apart when Adam refused to compromise on custody. Despite the restraining order and documented incidents, he demanded equal time. His lawyer argued that decisions like haircuts fell under normal parental rights. Victoria countered with a portfolio of evidence photos, reports, therapy notes, and documented harassment. The judge declined to enforce any changes, pushing the case toward a final custody hearing. As fall arrived, Ethan asked if he could dress as Thor for Halloween. His hair hadn't fully grown back yet, but he didn't care. We built his costume together, crafting a cardboard hammer wrapped in foil. His excitement was infectious, a flash of the boy he used to be before everything changed. The supervised visits continued, uneven and unpredictable. Some weeks Adam was cooperative, other weeks his frustration bled through. The social worker frequently reported that Adam tried to discuss the custody case with Ethan despite strict instructions not to. One visit ended when Adam grabbed Ethan's arm too roughly during an argument. The social worker intervened immediately. The court took it seriously. Given Ethan's age and the emotional trauma, they allowed him to skip the next 2 visits. He refused to see Adam, and his wishes were respected. Victoria filed a petition to modify custody permanently. The hearing was set for December, giving us 2 months to prepare. She remained confident, but reminded me not to let my guard down. Adam's family had money and motivation. I enrolled Ethan in an after-school art program, hoping to broaden his support system. He thrived there. He created elaborate illustrations of Viking ships crashing through waves and dramatic concert stages filled with lightning and sound. His teacher praised his emotional insight and creativity. Halloween arrived with a moment of joy. Ethan wore his Thor costume proudly, his growing hair peeking from under the helmet. Children admired his outfit, parents smiled at his confidence. For one night, we weren't battling courts or orders or shadows. We were just a mother and son enjoying Halloween. Then reality knocked, literally. The next morning, a process server arrived with a thick envelope. Adam was suing for full custody, accusing me of parental alienation and emotional abuse. The claims were absurd but legally serious. Victoria called it a desperate move, a flailing last attempt. Still, the sting of accusation hurt. November passed in a blur. Depositions, legal paperwork, witness coordination. Every day was a battle. Leah took more time off work to help with Ethan, who began sensing the tension. His anxiety returned in small, quiet ways, nail-biting, trouble sleeping, sudden sadness. Dr. Cole increased his therapy sessions, focusing on resilience. She prepared him for every possibility, helping him feel safe even in uncertainty. He expressed his fears honestly about living with Adam, about losing his hair again. Dr. Cole validated his emotions and gently guided him through them. And still, the harassment continued. Dead flowers left on our doorstep, pizza deliveries we never ordered, phone calls that came at the exact same time each night, only to go silent when answered. Subtle disruptions, psychological warfare. We documented every incident, every object, every time-stamped call, because we were building a case and protecting a child. Each incident, taken alone, might have seemed small, but together, they formed a chilling pattern of intimidation. Adam's family escalated their efforts, launching a calculated social media campaign. They posted old photos of Ethan, each captioned with emotional pleas about how much they missed their grandson. They cast themselves as the victim's grieving relatives unjustly cut off by a spiteful, unstable mother. I stayed off social media entirely, but Leah monitored everything, screenshotting posts and comments to include in our growing evidence file. 2 weeks before the hearing, Ethan's school called with disturbing news. A man claiming to be a child welfare investigator had approached staff, asking questions about Ethan's behavior. Fortunately, the principal sensed something was off and did a background check. The man turned out to be a friend of Walter's, posing as an investigator to gather information illegally. We added the incident to our case. The final supervised visit before the hearing was perhaps the most telling of all. Adam spent the full hour lecturing Ethan about family values and proper behavior. The social worker had to intervene repeatedly. Ethan left the room in tears, pleading with me not to make him go back again. That final visit report would prove pivotal. As December arrived, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come. Ethan's hair now fell past his shoulders, often tied back in a ponytail he styled himself. His confidence had slowly returned, though deep scars, emotional and psychological, remained. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We'd rebuilt it together, one piece at a time. The custody hearing loomed, the final battle in this long, grueling war over Ethan's safety, autonomy, and happiness. Victoria had prepared every detail meticulously. We had an overwhelming body of evidence, but I knew Adam's family wouldn't go down quietly. The hearing might settle the legal conflict, but the emotional aftermath could linger far longer. That night, Ethan drew a picture and quietly handed it to me. In it, he stood proudly with long, flowing hair, holding hands with me and Leah, all three of us walking toward a bright, glowing sun. At the bottom, in neat block letters, he'd written, "My real family." I tucked the drawing into my folder of court documents, a quiet, beautiful reminder of what we were fighting for. Win or lose, we'd given everything to protect Ethan's right to be himself. The morning of the hearing arrived with cold, freezing rain streaking down the apartment windows. Ethan ate breakfast in silence, his long hair pulled back with the leather tie from his old collection. Leah showed up early to drive us to court. Her steady presence grounded us in the storm ahead. Victoria met us in the parking garage, walking briskly as she reviewed final details. Her binders were organized and color-coded, each tab marking a piece of our timeline: incidents of harassment, court violations, social worker reports. The documentation was exhaustive, and every page told a story. Ethan waited in the courthouse family room with Leah while I stepped into the courtroom. Adam sat across from me, flanked by his new attorney, a sharply dressed man with a reputation for aggressive courtroom tactics. Walter sat in the first row behind them, surrounded by other family members I hadn't seen in months. They wore coordinated suits and dresses, deliberately curated to present the image of a respectable, united front. The judge entered, and the hearing began with opening statements. Adam's lawyer painted a dramatic picture claiming I was an unstable mother who had kidnapped her child, severed family ties, and twisted a routine parenting decision into an accusation of abuse. He presented affidavits from relatives, each one claiming my behavior had grown erratic, my parenting radical and damaging. Then Victoria stood. She countered their narrative with facts. She presented the photos: Ethan's bruises, the duct tape welts, the circular burn marks. She walked the judge through the timeline: each act of harassment, each boundary violated, the attempt to pick Ethan up from school under false pretenses, the social media campaign, the anonymous packages, the threatening phone calls, the staged visitations that ended in emotional distress. The supervised visit reports became our strongest evidence, documenting a consistent pattern of emotional manipulation and control. Adam took the stand first. His testimony was carefully rehearsed, every response tailored to make him appear as the caring, misunderstood father. He claimed Ethan had been hysterical that day, and the restraints were the only way to calm him down. The marks? Accidental. The burns? From a heating pad. Victoria's cross-examination cut through the performance. She pressed him hard. Why had he invited Walter over in secret? Why did he destroy Ethan's room? Why continue to violate court orders? His answers began to falter. His calm exterior cracked. He grew defensive, fumbled his words, contradicted himself. When asked to explain why a heating pad would leave circular burns on a child's back, he hesitated. He couldn't answer. And in that moment, the mask slipped just enough. The social worker testified next. Her reports painted a grim and consistent picture: Ethan's visible fear during visits, Adam's repeated attempts to discuss the custody case despite explicit warnings, and the incident where he'd grabbed Ethan's arm too roughly. Her professional assessment held weight, especially when she described Ethan's escalating anxiety in his father's presence. Then came Dr. Cole. Her expert testimony explained the psychological toll trauma takes on children. She spoke clearly and compassionately about how Ethan's symptoms aligned with those of children who had experienced abuse. She described the forced haircut not as a grooming choice, but as a violation of bodily autonomy and event that deeply undermined Ethan's sense of safety and control. She also testified about his slow but meaningful progress in therapy, his healing, his growing trust, his return to joy. And she emphasized how repeated, forced contact with Adam continued to hinder that recovery. All this, delivered under the cold fluorescent lights of a courtroom where Adam's family sat in perfectly coordinated outfits, as if costuming could erase accountability. Their behavior felt more like a performance than a legal proceeding, and it was clear they viewed the courtroom as a stage, complete with rehearsed lines and a false narrative. During the lunch break, I found Ethan in the family waiting room, bent over his sketchbook. He'd drawn himself as Thor again, strong and proud, flanked by two women clearly meant to be Leah and me. His drawing reflected his truth, his sense of safety, his chosen family. The afternoon session brought character witnesses, Adam's relatives, who repeated the same themes: traditional values, proper child rearing, the importance of strong male role models. Each one echoed the same talking points, criticizing my permissive parenting, claiming Ethan needed firm, masculine guidance. Then came our witnesses. Ethan's teacher testified about his remarkable transformation since leaving the toxic environment. His confidence had grown, his attention improved, his relationships with peers blossomed. The instructor from his after-school art program spoke about his creativity and emotional maturity, sharing how Ethan used art to process complex feelings and reclaim his identity. But the most powerful voice came from Leah. She testified about the night we showed up on her doorstep, disheveled and scared. She described the marks on Ethan's body, the duct tape welts, the burns. She spoke of the threatening phone calls, the packages left on her porch, the photographs tucked under her windshield. Her voice was calm, steady, and honest. She was my only family through all of this, and the sincerity in her testimony resonated throughout the courtroom. My turn came at the end of the day. Victoria guided me carefully through each event, starting with the day I came home to find my son duct-taped to a chair, through the choice to leave, and everything that followed. I stayed calm. I didn't embellish. I didn't break down. I let the truth speak for itself. Cross-examination was brutal. Adam's lawyer attacked my parenting. He criticized me for encouraging Ethan's interests in Vikings and long hair, accused me of overreacting to a harmless haircut, and claimed I had manipulated Ethan into fearing his father. He implied I had coached Ethan, twisted the narrative, and alienated Adam intentionally. I answered each question the way Victoria and I had practiced, directly, factually, without emotion. Then came the psychologist's report, the one submitted by Adam's team, alleging gender confusion. Victoria objected immediately, pointing out that the doctor had never once evaluated Ethan. The judge allowed it into the record, but made clear that she would weigh it accordingly, especially in comparison to Dr. Cole's ongoing and direct treatment relationship. With testimony concluded, the judge announced she would review the evidence and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. The wait would be agonizing, but Victoria was confident. The evidence was clear, the reports thorough, and the expert testimony compelling. As we exited the courthouse, I spotted Walter approaching from across the lot. Leah instinctively stepped in front of Ethan, protective and unwavering. Victoria stepped between them, calmly reminding Walter of the restraining order. He stopped just short of the court-mandated distance, said nothing. But his eyes were filled with rage. His silence was threatening enough. The next 2 weeks tested every ounce of our resilience. Ethan's anxiety surged. Despite continued therapy, he became more withdrawn, fearful of being forced to live with Adam, terrified that his hair might be taken from him again. Dr. Cole worked with him on coping strategies, but the looming uncertainty weighed heavily. Adam, meanwhile, escalated the harassment. Unwanted pizza deliveries became a nightly occurrence. Our tires were slashed twice. The phone rang at all hours with anonymous calls. We documented every incident. We filed police reports. We added to our already massive file. Then, one evening, as I sorted through the mail, I found an unmarked envelope. Inside were more photos. Ethan at school, Ethan at therapy, Ethan walking in the park with Leah. Each image had a handwritten message on the back, cryptic notes about proper boy behavior, like sinister instructions on how to erase who he was becoming. The violation of being watched, photographed, and silently threatened pushed me to take even more precautions. I installed additional security systems, motion sensors, doorbell cameras, reinforced locks. Leah stayed with us most nights. Her presence served as both comfort and deterrent, and she had become the backbone of our support system. She helped Ethan with homework, made dinner when I was too exhausted to think, and helped maintain a fragile sense of normalcy in the chaos. Ethan had started calling her his protector, a title she embraced wholeheartedly and with quiet pride. Then came the day we'd all been waiting for. Victoria called early that morning. The judge will announce her ruling at 2 p.m. I kept Ethan home from school. Neither of us could have focused on anything normal. Leah showed up carrying bags of what she called stress-baking muffins, cookies, banana bread, but none of us had much appetite. At the courthouse, the gallery was crowded, packed with Adam's family. They whispered in tight circles, casting cold stares in our direction. Ethan sat between Leah and me, gripping our hands with nervous intensity. Victoria reviewed possible outcomes one last time, preparing us for any direction the judge might go. I was bracing myself for compromise, for uncertainty, for more waiting. The judge entered and began reading her decision. She acknowledged how difficult the case had been, with complex dynamics and competing testimonies. Then she methodically addressed each point. The restraining orders against both Adam and Walter were made permanent. Supervised visitation would remain in place indefinitely. Adam would be required to complete anger management and parenting classes before the court would even consider modifications. Then, the most important piece, sole legal and physical custody was awarded to me. The judge stated clearly that Adam's ongoing harassment, his refusal to respect court orders, and his role in emotionally and physically harming Ethan proved he could not prioritize his child's welfare. She specifically cited the duct tape and burn incident as unconscionable abuse that disqualified him from having unsupervised contact. Adam exploded. He stood up, shouting about bias and injustice, claiming the court was corrupt and blaming feminist conspiracies. His lawyer tried to calm him, but he kept ranting. Walter joined in, shouting that the system was rigged and accusing me of poisoning the family. The bailiff stepped forward. Both men had to be physically escorted from the courtroom. As calm returned to the room, Victoria leaned in and gently walked me through what the ruling meant. Ethan was safe. The harassment and intimidation would now carry severe legal consequences. We could finally begin rebuilding a life without the constant fear of interference. The judge had seen through their manipulations. She had chosen to protect Ethan over appeasing outdated notions of control and family image. Outside, Adam's relatives were gathered on the courthouse steps. We avoided them by leaving through a side exit, but their angry voices trailed after us, threats of appeal, accusations of betrayal, declarations that this wasn't over. Victoria reassured me that appeals almost never succeeded without new evidence. We had truth on our side. That night, we celebrated quietly at home. Ethan seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted from his small shoulders. Over dinner, he asked, "Does this mean I can grow my hair as long as I want now?" I smiled and nodded. "Yes, love. As long as you want." His grin was the widest I'd seen in months. The following weeks brought the calm we hadn't realized we'd forgotten how to feel. Adam missed his first supervised visit. Then his second. His attorney filed an appeal, But as Victoria predicted, it had no traction. The harassment, too, began to subside, likely because his lawyer warned him any further incidents would only damage his case more. Ethan thrived. His hair reached past his shoulder blades. He dove back into his Viking passion with renewed enthusiasm. His bedroom became a small museum of Norse mythology and metal band posters, most of which Leah helped him find. Therapy sessions grew less frequent as Ethan's anxiety eased and his self-assurance returned. His drawings became brighter, his laughter more frequent. I found a job that provided consistent income and flexible hours, allowing me to be there for school pickups and therapy sessions. Leah remained a constant, joining us for weeknight dinners, weekend hikes, school events. We had become a family, not through tradition, but through intention, love, and shared healing. 3 months later, the appeal hearing arrived. Adam appeared distant, no longer fiery, but defeated. His new attorney made vague arguments about parental rights and implied judicial bias. They presented no new evidence, just the same claims reworded. The appellate judge upheld the original decision, citing the overwhelming evidence in support of it. That was the final blow. Walter made one last attempt at contact, a letter delivered through his lawyer demanding visitation with Ethan and threatening legal action if it was denied. Victoria responded swiftly and firmly. Walter had no legal standing. Any attempt at contact would be a direct violation of the restraining order. We never heard from him again. Ethan's hair eventually grew to the middle of his back, longer than it had ever been. He wore it proudly, often styling it in elaborate braids that Leah taught him for school events. Sometimes other parents asked questions. Ethan now explained his hair with confidence. He was growing it like his Viking heroes. He no longer questioned his choice. The supervised visits became infrequent. Adam would occasionally show up, sitting through the hour in awkward silence or half-hearted conversation. Ethan participated out of obligation, not desire. The social worker's reports reflected the lack of emotional connection, no warmth, no genuine bond. 6 months after the final ruling, Adam stopped coming altogether. His lawyer sent a brief letter stating he was relocating out of state for work. There was no mention of Ethan, no effort to maintain contact. The abandonment stung, but Ethan seemed more relieved than heartbroken. It was closure in its own way. We settled into our new rhythm: school, therapy when needed, art classes, weekend dinners with Leah. Ethan made friends who appreciated him for exactly who he was. He even performed in the school talent show, headbanging to his favorite metal track, his long hair whipping in every direction. The audience went wild. I cried tears of joy. The divorce was finalized quietly. The asset division was simple. We didn't have much, and Adam didn't contest anything. The final papers arrived on a Tuesday, closing that chapter with finality. One evening, Ethan asked if I thought his dad ever really loved him. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes love gets twisted by fear, by how people are raised. But that doesn't mean you were ever unworthy of it. We talked about breaking cycles, about choosing kindness, about being true to yourself, even when the world pushes against it. Soon after, Leah moved into our building. Officially, she'd become part of the family we built, a support system formed by love, not blood. Ethan now had 2 strong female role models beside him, showing him that family isn't about convention, it's about care. The trauma didn't disappear entirely. Certain sounds still made Ethan flinch. He still had occasional nightmares about being tied down. But those moments grew fewer and farther between, replaced by laughter, by music, by joy. He knew he was safe. He knew he was loved. He knew, without question, that he was accepted exactly as he was. Sometimes I wondered what might have changed if I had left sooner, seen the signs earlier. But regret couldn't rewrite the past. We'd survived. We'd built something beautiful from the ruins. Ethan now spoke about his past with incredible insight. He understood that some people can't accept what they don't understand, and that their limitations didn't have to limit him. He'd become a quiet advocate for kids like him, the ones who didn't fit in tidy boxes, the ones who felt pressured to hide who they were. We marked the 1-year anniversary of leaving with a small celebration, just the 3 of us. Ethan had finally reached his hair goal, thick, healthy, flowing down his back in true Viking fashion. But more importantly, he had found peace with who he was. Leah baked a cake. We looked through photos from that first terrible night all the way to now. Ethan created a collage showing his transformation. He titled it Becoming Myself. We framed it and hung it proudly in the living room. The extended family faded completely from our lives. No more calls, no more threats, no more attempts to reassert control. They'd moved on to other targets, other battles. We heard the occasional update through distant contacts, but never felt compelled to reconnect. Ethan started middle school with his hair brushing his shoulder blades and a quiet, unshakable confidence. When older kids tried to tease him, he responded with facts explaining Viking culture and metal music history until curiosity overtook cruelty. More often than not, he won them over. I enrolled in evening classes, pursuing additional education while Leah watched Ethan. Single motherhood was still a challenge, but our support system made it manageable. We had built proof that family didn't need to look a certain way to be real, to be whole. Dr. Cole officially discharged Ethan from regular therapy, noting his incredible progress. She remained available if needed, but believed he had developed the tools to navigate future challenges with strength and clarity. The healing journey wasn't over and might never be fully complete, but we were moving forward with hope instead of fear. I knew Ethan would face future pressure to conform, to shrink himself for someone else's comfort. But he now understood something most people take years to learn, that being yourself is worth fighting for. That real strength comes not from control or conformity, but from authenticity. He knew he was loved unconditionally, irrevocably. Our apartment had become a true home. Viking posters covered the walls, metal music echoed through the rooms. His bedroom was a reflection of his spirit, no longer hidden, no longer edited for someone else's approval. Friends came over often, drawn to his enthusiasm, his storytelling, his fierce sense of self. We had built something extraordinary from the wreckage, something tender and fierce, delicate and unbreakable. A family built by choice, by truth, by love. Ethan now wore his hair past his waist, and not once, not ever again, did he question whether he was loved for exactly who he was. Thanks for listening to my story, and for letting me share a few hard-earned truths along the way. Catch you next time, friends.